So welcome everybody to this, the latest in a series of roundtable discussions, conversations leading up to the Green Economy Conference, which is taking place in Swansea Arena on the 22nd of November. This event is being organised by For the Region, and my name's Philip McDonnell. I'll be chairing this session today. I'm an associate with For the Region. So we've got a really interesting event ahead of us this morning. We're going to be looking at and talking about nature and the economy. And we've got a group of panelists, 4 people that are joining us with interesting knowledge and experience around these matters. So I'm going to go around each in turn and ask them to just briefly introduce themselves, their name, the organisation that they work with or represent, and the kind of activities that they're involved with. Let's kick off this morning with Rhianne Jones.
Hi, thank you, Philip. My name's Rhianne Jones. I work for National Resources Wales in the Strategic Environmental Policy team. And so as part of my day-to-day, that's really looking at topics that have national or international significance and how they impact Wales at NRW and helping the organisation adapt to what's coming ahead. And obviously the nature crisis firmly fits into that box. And I'm leading the organisation in some of the innovative approaches we're looking at to try and tackle that.
Thank you, Rhianne. Hugh?
Bore da, diolch am y gwahoddiad. My name is Sue Williams. Similar to Rhianne, I work for Natural Resources Wales. I work in the People and Places team covering South West. And we focus very much then on local issues, working with the PSBs, the area statements, but also looking at projects then and innovative projects where we can enhance nature in the area.
Thanks very much, Hugh. Rachel, welcome.
Bore da pawb, and diolch I ti am y gwahoddiad For the Region. I am Rachel Carter. I'm Local Places for Nature Officer for One Voice Wales, which is the membership organisation for community and town councils across Wales. There's 732 of them. And my main parts of my role are to advise on biodiversity enhancement so they can meet their Section 6 duty under the Environment Act, but also to help them access funding under the Local Places for Nature scheme and other funding where necessary, and advise on anything to do with biodiversity. Thanks.
Thanks, Rachel. And now over to you, James.
Hi, good morning, everyone. My name's James Moore. I was thinking, how do I describe the work? I guess for the purpose of this, I'm working with the University of Wales Trinity St David's, and we are supporting Neath Talbot Council with delivering nature walks and general awareness and of particular nature areas in Neath Talbot, with 3 main aims really. One is to help people be in nature more, the second is to understand it more, and the third is to love it more. We successfully won a tender from Neath Talbot Council with them having gained some funding from Welsh Government, so we're in the process of delivering sessions as we speak. So hopefully a sense of how we can actually do some of this stuff in practice, I guess.
That's great. Thanks for that, James. We'll come back and hear a little bit more in detail of some of the activities that you're involved with a little bit later on. Thank you all for joining us this morning. It's really good that you've given up the time to come and share a little bit about this particular topic. I think it's probably appropriate to actually start with you, Rhianne, and try to get some sense of the political context in which this discussion sits. Now, the UK government is, some might say, moving at pace on this issue, the role of green finance, for example. Maybe you could talk a little bit about how politics and the markets may be driving businesses potentially in the wrong direction. You might also want to touch on why we need to care about the nature emergency in the first place. You know, what are the issues that we're needing to grapple with within this context?
So I suppose I'll start with the last bit first, if that's okay. So this idea of why we should care about the nature emergency. We should care about the nature emergencies because nature is the underpinnings of our planet. It's literally impacting the air we breathe, the quality of our water, the quality of the foods that grow in our ground. It's our entire landscape and environment. So the reason you should care about the nature emergency is because it gets right to the heart of kind of the quality of your surroundings, the quality of your health, how much you can enjoy the outside, the access, the recreation potential out there for your own health and well-being and happiness. And it's literally, as I say, that kind of underpinning of our planet is nature. Something like 50% of the global GDP is dependent on nature. So, it's not even just an environmental issue, it's really ingrained into all those natural resources and how we use them. Sometimes obviously very badly, but equally, quite well, kind of for the health and happiness of the human beings that live across the globe. So, it's a very kind of big topic, but also very local to you in terms of your own natural environment and nature. So it's one of these massively sprawling topics, which is quite hard then to pin down to exactly what it means to you, quite specifically, your local area. Hence why it's quite difficult to talk about and grapple with sometimes. To go then on to perhaps more of the side about what's happening out there. The good news, in a way, is that the nature emergency has been recognised. The UN has recognised this along with the sustainability goals, so it is kind of in that sense quite a recognised global crisis. But you also have, Welsh Government, in addition to the climate crisis that has been announced, we have had kind of them announcing the need to tackle the biodiversity crisis. As you say, UK government, obviously Wales is very much part of the UK, equally in slightly different, I think, approach, are also kind of recognising the importance of it. With that kind of attention does come a certain amount then of actions that fall out of that. But it is then quite complicated to understand how something that's being developed or spoken at a kind of national or international stage, actually how that translates into things that are happening more on the ground and things that are beneficial to you personally. You do have Welsh Government announcing that national emergency. You've got organisations out there who are very much trying to account for and measure and figure out kind of the sorts of actions that need to take place. The recent biodiversity deep dive that's kind of trying to translate some of the international targets into action on the ground in Wales. So there is momentum building behind all of this. But part of the challenge of that is just how complex nature is in a way, because nature really is based on, a diverse range of ecosystems that really impact each other. And kind of work together in a very tight network, and doing an action in one place can very much have an impact somewhere else. And sometimes those unintended consequences are a bit hard to figure out. So it's a very kind of tangled and complex problem. And then you also have the challenge, obviously, of for governments in particular, how to take what might be necessary from a national perspective and translate it into local action, because obviously it's very diverse and local actions might not be more bespoke to an area, and governments do struggle sometimes to work locally. But you also have the fact it's that the timescales of some of this is really kind of significant and much longer sometimes than the political cycle of thinking. And I think finally one of the biggest challenges is a lot of research has been done into trying to figure out just the scale of what's going on. And certainly internationally, with things like Dasgupta and natural capital accounting, we've started to get a better understanding of almost the economic impact of some of this. I think globally it's something like 600 billion a year needs to be spent just to reverse the decline in biodiversity. This isn't even kind of improving what's out there, it's just reversing the decline. I think that equates to 16 billion annual loss to GDP in the UK, the decline in biodiversity. And again, that's just the decline, that's not the actions to reverse some of this and fix it. So it's a very large problem, and as I said, very complex. So that's where you get then more innovative solutions being looked at. And I suppose that's perhaps where some of the people on the call today might be more interested in terms of some of that economics and how businesses are factoring into that and how you can take more action and get involved yourselves in what can be done.
Thanks, Rhianne. You've very clearly then highlighted some of the key links between nature and the economy and business decisions that might be made. One thing you did mention was climate change, and I just wonder what your view is around taking action to tackle the climate crisis, whether there are some actions that actually could make biodiversity loss worse.
Well, it's as with everything in the natural world, that this is another complex topic. I think part of the challenge in this space is, in a way, the climate crisis has got slightly better marketing around it, perhaps, than the nature or biodiversity crisis. And it's certainly been more understood, I think, by the public on the ground in terms of, its profile at an international and more local stage. But really, for me, it comes down to, and this is very much kind of NRW's perspective on what we're wanting to see in this space, is the natural environment is the underpinning. It's the health and resilience of our ecosystems. Climate change is change. So if your underpinnings and the nature is in good condition and it's healthy and it's resilient, it's more able to adapt to any change, adverse change or beneficial change. If the natural resources and nature is in a healthy state, then it's better able to adapt to that climate change that's coming. And also then if you go and start looking at some of the interventions that would help perhaps reverse the decline in biodiversity or start mitigating or reverse the impacts of climate change, there's actually a lot of synergy between the two. A really good example would just be looking at a topic like soils, where I think it's around 80% of carbon stores are actually in soils, and yet soils are one of our most degraded ecosystems, and really improving the health and well-being and improving the biodiversity of our soils would actually, for example, store a lot more carbon. So the two very much do go hand in hand. I just think it's unfortunate that, as I said, the climate crisis is a bit more marketing, and certainly some of those large international interventions and big funds and schemes have come along to fix climate change. And some of that's kind of run away, I think, slightly before we've properly understood some of the evidence and some of the interconnectivity. So I think that's more where the adverse impacts are coming through, is just how quickly, especially when you're looking at markets and economics, how quickly that will move beyond where I think perhaps we've necessarily got some of the best evidence to take the right action in the right place.
What we should be looking at is a focus on nature positive actions. Those in themselves will probably do an awful lot, make a large contribution to the climate crisis, or resolving the climate crisis as well. Hugh, I wonder if we might move over to you for a moment. You also work with NRW, Natural Resources Wales. You're directly involved with some practical activities. I understand a project in Cross Hands, which kind of like relates to this topic around finances or business and nature. Do you want to just tell us a little bit about some of those practical activities?
Yeah, Cross Hands itself for Carmarthenshire Council was a strategic growth area going back with their local development plans now, so going back over 10 years. And what we were finding was that because there's the Mynydd Mawr area designated for marsh fritillary butterflies for rose marshy grassland, there was a conflict really between the European designated SAC, Special Area Conservation, the Mynydd Mawr area, and then this need to develop Cross Hands as a strategic growth area. In many ways, there was an impasse because we were trying to be HabRegs compliant, but we were also then potentially stopping development because we didn't have the information, we didn't have the right mitigation then from developers. We were losing sites that were being cleared first before coming in for planning. So we were losing the habitats, and obviously when they came into planning, it was difficult then to prove that it was going to have an impact. So it was a mess in many respects because everybody was sort of fighting each other and there wasn't a coordinated look at how this could work. And it came about with a developer over in Cefneithin on habitat that was rank but certainly salvageable. But they were saying, well, we're in the business of developing land, building houses, building industrial units. We don't have the knowledge to provide the right mitigation. We're not in the business of managing land in perpetuity, if you like. Being put on the spot, how could we resolve this? And we came up with a suggestion of, well, if they contributed into a central pot, because long term, there were a number of sites in the middle of Cross Hands that we would always have struggled to retain and to enhance to a level where they would be good for biodiversity, if you like. If it was only from air pollution, increased use, disturbance, and everything else. So we tested this concept then where we had a certain amount of money per roof, because the other aspect was marsh fritillary rely on connectivity through the landscape. They want to move from site to site. They want like a patchwork of breeding sites, if you like. But then they're not the best flyers in the world. They don't move that well from site to site. So having a clear piece of land is equally as valuable, because if you've got an industrial unit between two potentially good blocks of habitat, that blocks their passage from one to the other. And we were challenged then, is the value of a clean, clear passage through an improved piece of land more valuable than another habitat that's perhaps a kilometre away? And we were being challenged at putting individual sort of values on sites in isolation. And again, it was leading to an impasse between us developers and the local authority. So we came up with the concept of, well, so much per roof, and we tested the waters. We looked at the value of land in the area. We went to independent valuers, and we came up with a sum of around £1,000 a roof on a standard 31 houses per acre sort of basis, which was the average for development in Carmarthenshire at the time. And we tested this through two planning appeals. We won both, presented it then at the RTPI meeting, where Dave Tilsley, who anybody in the conservation world will know, Dave Tilsley is the UK guru on habregs. We presented it in front of him to see if he agreed that this was going to be compliant with the regulations and provided the appropriate mitigation. And he agreed with us. So we subsequently presented it in the LDP hearing with Welsh Government, and it was adopted by Carmarthenshire. But it's mitigation. It's not, it can't be compensation for habregs. But that central pot then is used to actually enhance habitats away from that cluster of development in the middle of Cross Hands. So we're spending the money in the right place. Carmarthenshire have adopted the scheme themselves. They've employed a person to run this scheme. It's secured habitat now that we know we can secure long term. We know it's away from that hub of development area that was always going to be a challenge to retain. We're basing it on science because we've been able to map the area. We know where the marsh fertility sites are, and there's over 100 hectares now of land between the designated areas and these areas within the Mynydd Mawr mitigation area that's now safeguarded for roast pasture. So it's very much a developer pays, if you like. When development was really flying, there was a lot of need. There was a lot of money coming into that central pot. With COVID and everything and development slowed down, there's less money coming in, but then the threats are less as well. So it also then reacts to the markets as far as, pressures from developments, and you can plan ahead because we've now got a good understanding of the mapped areas, so we can provide these habitats and stepping blocks across the landscape, if you like.
That's a really interesting example, Hugh, and to be perfectly honest, I wasn't aware of that initiative, so thanks for sharing that with us. You mentioned the concept being like developer pays, which I guess is a little bit similar to the concept of polluter pays, isn't it, really? So businesses getting involved and putting money either voluntarily or through legislation or whatever means towards, as you say, mitigation of an issue that they may be contributing to or potentially making worse as part of their activities. You did mention, Hugh, that Carmarthenshire have taken on board this policy, adopted this policy. So, well, two questions really. One is, with that Cross Hands pilot, if we can call it that, in your view, has that been successful or is it early days? And secondly, then, is there an appetite to roll this out? Is this model, is this approach being taken on board and applied elsewhere?
I think it's been successful. Well, it has been successful. The political climate has changed a lot since over the last 10 years, if you like. We're looking at another pilot project with grasslands now outside designated sites. And we're trying to do something a little different. I think we were obliged at the time to follow the agri-environment payment structures, if you like. So there's a standard payment. What we're looking at now possibly is to engage more with landowners and reward them for good management. So where there's an annual payment for the land, if you like, for bringing it into the scheme, we're trying to change that now so that there's a base rate for when you come in, which is usually fairly low or would be fairly low. And then once that land is being managed to get it into favorable condition, we're looking at transition payment. But what we're hoping to do then is to have a reward, if you like, for good management, so that if you're managing the land properly, it's in favorable condition, it's being managed in a way that is best for those habitats, if you like, in the best way for those habitats, then your annual payment is significantly more, so that we engage landowners into being basically rewarded and paid for good management. Because in many respects, when you're taking this out to the wider landscape, there's a limited resource of people within NRW, the local authorities, the NGOs that can go out and manage this land. What we want is for landowners themselves to actually have pride and to be engaged in that proper land management to actually maximize the benefit. And it can be rolled out across any habitats. Obviously, marsh fritillaries, crosshans, and South Wales is a key area. They've declined across Europe. We've still got good meta populations across the South Wales valleys, but the resource to manage them individually within organisations is quite low, and you can't do it without the landowners. So if we can bring the landowners and get landowners to actually have pride in managing habitats as they do their farming enterprises, if you like, then it's only a win-win for everybody.
Thanks you for sharing that. I guess what you're suggesting is we're talking about creating a shift in attitudes really towards nature across the board, and increasing understanding about the importance of connecting with nature for well-being and health. And it's not just about government bodies, policies, and large sort of schemes. We're also talking about increasing the great examples that we already see, great examples of initiatives within communities across our region. And so it's great that we've got on the call, on the panel today, Rachel and James as well, who can share some insight around some of those sort of activities. So perhaps if we come to you, Rachel, first. There's lots of community nature projects going on. So perhaps you could tell us about the kinds of things that you have been involved with and the projects that you've been supporting. And I understand you've got a couple of slides as well to share with us. Over to you, Rachel.
Thanks, Phil. Yeah, so I just wanted to add really to what's been discussed already, because my job gives me a really good overview of the kind of attitude on the ground across Wales. I speak to a lot of community groups and councils, these elected representatives for our communities. And when you consider that community and town councils cover 94% of the land area of Wales, and 70% of the population, that's quite an influence that these community and town councillors can have on nature, really. But when I speak to people, there's a lot of misconceptions about Wales and biodiversity, and a lot of a lack of awareness about how the situation is across Wales. They look out their window and they see greenery, they see rolling mountainsides and hills and trees, and think everything's great. But I think we know from the latest State of Nature report that's not the case. We've got huge declines in invertebrates and other species and flowering plants. And often what I come against as well is the desire to plant as many trees as possible. So one of the first requests is, how can we plant trees in our area? So I'm sort of going straight in to try and persuade them that we need a bit more of a holistic approach to nature, and that tree planting isn't always the answer to everything. And unfortunately, I have seen areas where they've had funding from various NGOs, and they've planted trees on an area that may have been a very productive wildflower meadow or marshy grassland. So it's good that this role exists. I'm in my third year now, so it's good that we can get out and talk to that sector. The main role of the Local Places for Nature officer was to push a really good fund called Local Places for Nature, which is about creating nature on the doorstep. So a lot of community and town councils across Wales, and in particularly in Carmarthenshire, has been a really successful county for Local Places for Nature, as well as Neath Talbot, Swansea and Pembrokeshire. But it's about creating nature on your doorstep for public. So about creating green spaces where people can see them and use them. So around bus stops and schools and community centres and doctor surgeries. So we're hopefully trying to re-engage people with nature so they can, as James touched on earlier, if they can see it, they can value it, they can appreciate it, and hopefully they're going to invest in it. And also, community and town councils are subject to Section 6 of the Environment Act. So they have a statutory duty to restore, enhance and create biodiversity and improve ecosystem resilience. So I've worked with a particularly great project, which has just won an award for community involvement, is in Betws, which is near Ammanford in Carmarthenshire. And sort of as an example of a project that has really changed the sort of green infrastructure of a small sort of ex-mining town. They had one of these sort of traditional parks. Everything was mown to death. Every 2 weeks, the mower would come in and kill everything. And I managed to persuade them to get some funding to convert some old disused tennis courts, so just black tarmac. And we converted that, well, they did, into a beautiful nature park. And I can actually show you a picture now.
Yes, we can see that, Rachel. Thank you.
Awesome. Brilliant. That's nice when it works. So it's just an example of the sorts of projects that are going around Wales through community and town council. So you can see this is a standard municipal park. Loads, and look at the grass. It's just, I mean, this is January, I know, but it's mown. It looks like that in the summer as well, except a little bit more yellow. And they were very keen on having flower beds with begonias and petunias and all those sorts of horticultural annuals. We were able to turn these tennis courts, if I can get it to move forward. You can see some of the sort of on the ground images here, into lots of different elements. So they went a bit mad. They had a little bit of everything. So we've got wildflower meadow, community growing. I said, why don't we have some habitat for reptiles and invertebrates? So they managed to get some donated pennant stone, created dry stone walls, infilled with soil and wildflowers, mosses and ferns. They kind of covered every ecosystem they could. They created these mounds to increase surface area of the park. So now, instead of, it's almost doubled the surface area for planting. And obviously they've involved the community as well, which is really, really important. Coming back to that idea of getting communities into engage with nature. And there's what I really wanted to show is the before and after picture. So you can see, visually the difference. And again, this is in January. We need a nice update of this, because this area here at the back is now a beautiful species diverse wildflower meadow, mainly created through changing mowing practices across the park. So in the more formal part, we've gone down to a slightly reduced mowing interval. And at the top, we've just created a meadow. So it's on a cut and collect twice a year. And it has been enhanced with seed from the National Botanical Gardens of Wales as well. So lots of yellow rattle in there. And this has become, an absolutely stunning landscape now on a very small level. One the great thing is it's right next to a river as well. So we've got, really good connectivity in this part of the world as well. They really have embraced the idea of ecosystem resilience, but on a small scale, but also that variety, which I think is really important. I think they did plant a lot of trees, but you can't really, it's not a dense woodland. It wasn't on anything valuable. They wanted trees in there, and I was able to persuade them that we really need to be supporting all parts of the ecosystem. Another issue I often come across is bees. So there's sort of, everyone wants to protect bees, and they're immediately, can we have some hives? So that's another thing I have to sort of battle against. They all want to put hives in these community gardens or in these nature parks. So training them in basic biodiversity information, but also informing them about the plight of wild native bees and the different types of bees. I mean, the lack of awareness of the different types. Most people think honeybees are maybe the only bee we have. So it can be quite a groundbreaker when I tell them that actually, honeybees are not the bees we need to be protecting, and that we actually have a huge variety of bumblebees and other bees. And that always taken on board really positively. And we've had, bare earth slopes being introduced into projects, and wood piles for different types of bees, and pollinator friendly planting instead of these awful annuals you see everywhere. So there's a huge movement across the sector, and I get quite excited about it. So I'm going to stop talking now, but I hope that's given you a quick overview of what's going on.
Thanks ever so much, Rachel. You're very enthusiastic about this, and I can see why when you can get results like the example that you've given, which clearly is very inspiring. And I don't know about anybody else, but I'm very keen to go and have a little look at how that park has developed. Let's move over to James and find out a little bit more about what you're doing. Earlier on, at the start of this session, you referred to the aims of the project that you're involved with. I wonder if you wouldn't mind just repeating those aims and then telling us a little bit more about the project with perhaps some practical examples of things that you're doing.
Yeah, sure. Thank you. So, I mean, the background of the project or the aims of the project are really threefold, and we try to keep it really simple for deliberately. So the first is for more people to be in nature. The second is that they understand their nature more. And the third is they love their nature more. And this is very much thinking about their own local nature. So the background of the project is that Neath Talbot Council, their biodiversity team, very keen. They've been running a Working with Nature overall project for some time now, and there's various different strands, including the wellness of sort of people wellness, if you like. So forest sessions and doing sessions where you just trying to help people be more well, and some mindfulness sessions and so on. The other parts then are about habitat management, and then I guess the third part is, and it does all overlap really neatly, I think, is this focus on, quite often our focus on what nature can do for us as people. And it's actually maybe, and what I'm hearing here today as well is specifically is what can we do for nature? And I think that's a really important part of the project. So to bring it to a very practical level, our offering is to run a series of nature walks in the local community areas. So there are 10 sites we're doing this. So they are either owned or managed or have some sort of responsibility, or Neath Talbot Council have some sort of responsibility for them. And we are running a series of nature walks. We've run a couple so far. We've got a whole load planned, so pretty much on a weekly basis, including some specifically for schools. So after half term, we've got a session with Vivian Park School, for example, because that's the way in that particular community. So work with the local community councillors there. That's the way in with that community, to get them interested, to get the children interested, to get the adults interested. So that was our sense of how to do this. It's just a little example. In other areas, there are we're running sessions, open community sessions, where we have a particular focus. So it might be around the trees in that area, it might be around the water, it might be around the carbon. So it might be one about water quality. So last week we were in Abergele, where we used some chemical sampling, for example, just to show people in a very real time sense what the quality of water was like in the canal next to Abergele. I'm delighted to say very low phosphates, very low nitrates, and very low sulfates as well. So big thumbs up to the good people of Neath and further up the Neath Valley. The other sessions are focusing on particular aspects of habitat. So we've got a session next week for example, in Bryn, where we'll be looking at the grasslands there. So I'm not an ecologist by background, but one of the joys of work in the universities, we do have some real experts. So we're sort of co-facilitating this so that there is an emphasis in a roundabout way on people's wellness. And I'll just touch on something in a second around this. But it's a real sense of helping people to get into a real understanding of their local nature. For what it's worth, and this is where I think this might sort of bring this round into the economics of this. My background has been predominantly in the NHS and people and culture, with a real sense of how we help people be well or more well or well enough. And my sense is that our healthcare systems don't always get this right. Hence frustration, hence moving to more of a university sector. What I have done over the last 10 years is run a programme on behalf of Welsh Government called Explore and Walk, where it has very much been around people, and it's a leadership, but small leadership development around people, the being more connected and more well with their environment. So built on mindfulness, movement, outdoor space. And the reason I mention that is that we know that nature makes us more empathetic, and that's with ourselves, others, our nature, our communities, and because the world of work is fundamentally built on relationships are fundamentally built on empathy. So de facto, if we want our organizations to be healthier, if we want our communities to be healthier, and if they're around productivity or profit, or all organizations have some sense of the importance of employee engagement, it's really important that people spend more time getting outside and understanding their nature more. It will make them more effective in whatever they're doing. It will make them kinder. And I guess the final aim of the project I'm involved in is to make the communities more resilient. So we are doing some sessions on, if you like, the loosest possible term, train the trainer, but to give local community members the confidence and maybe some of the skills to actually run some of these sessions themselves, along with some of the tools and techniques. So some, pointing to some of the apps and things like that. So it does create this sense of we'll help as an intervention, but actually in the long run, this is about you feeling confident to go and make this happen yourself. So it hopefully is a long-term sustainable change as well.
Thanks ever so much, James. No, that was a really good overview, and very interesting project. And I think you've kind of broadened the discussion a little bit and raised a number of other really poignant issues there. At this point, I think we will give the panelists a little break, or maybe not, let's see, because we'll open it up to the floor. If anybody has any comments on what they've heard, or if they've got other perspectives or issues that they want to raise as part of this session, or indeed, if you do have any, specific questions to one or more of the panelists, now is the time. So let's start. I think, Penny, you were first. Don't forget to unmute yourself. And if you'd like to make your point or ask a question. Over to you, Penny.
Hi, thanks very much. I'm from Swansea Council. I've been attending obviously lots of events. My particular, I guess, involvement at the moment is around urban green infrastructure, but lots of events about the importance of increasing biodiversity, particularly in urban spaces. And there's a lot of discussion around the role of maintenance or nurturing. And I was just interested in what you guys were saying. I was at an event last week where it was clear that there's an expectation that sometimes the images that we give about what something's going to look like is the expectation or what it will look like. And we're sort of quite, I think, culturally entrenched in sort of the capability group brown sort of view of the world, and our sort of Victoriana city centre planting, etc. And I'm finding it really hard to say, yes, nature's messy. We need it to be messy. We need it to do its thing. But in some circumstances, we also might need to maintain it in a different way to make sure, like if you're talking about a bioretention sud solution or something, it needs to be more maintained to ensure it does the functionality it's designed to do. So I was just wondering if that's something you guys come up against and how you sort of deal with that sort of an issue, because for me, it's a biggie.
Anybody on the panel want to comment on that? I think it's a really interesting couple of points you've raised there, Penny. Hugh, you've unmuted. Did you have a thought?
Yeah, we had it down in Llanelli where the Millennium Park, and everybody wanted it again. And I think Rachel has alluded to it. They're like these moan sort of, the Bowling Green lawn type of scenarios. And it's that culture shift and persuading people that long grass and wildflowers are actually good for nature. It's this perception that if it's all neat and tidy and sort of cut to an inch of its depth, that's how it should be. And nature is messy, and it will thrive a lot better when you do allow it to do its own thing. And that's not necessarily rewilding where you abandon it. We have to manage these habitats. None of these habitats will exist in a favorable state unless they're managed. And in the urban situation, that does mean cutting on occasions. Our roadside verges are a perfect example of this, where traditionally they've been cut 3-4 times a year. And now we see roadside verges being allowed and perhaps only being mown once a year. And it's this, and it's not about saving money, as some people like to make it out, or the council don't cut it anymore because they want. No, it actually is good for biodiversity. These things are allowed to thrive, but we have to have an idea of what we want as well. And as you said, this functionality comes into it first. They have to be functional, they have to serve their purpose. And then we look at what else can we have out of it. So if we start with what it's built for, and then, okay, how can we enhance that? How can we make it better? What management can we have that will ensure that it retains its functionality, but also then delivers for biodiversity? And I think that's the challenge. There is a challenge then to actually get the public to understand that. And I think that's a duty for all of us then. And to also try and make sure that we don't have the nature emergency and climate emergency in silos. These habitats are sequestrating carbon. Why change them? Manage them for the biodiversity and the best biodiversity they can provide. They will actually answer our climate emergency as well. If you change those habitats completely into whatever else you're trying to do with them, planting trees being one of them, then you are going to lose carbon for the first 20, 30, 40 years perhaps. So we're actually taking it the wrong way rather than, but the quick hit is usually, and as Rhianne said, climate change perhaps gets more of a focus. We need to bring those links that they actually coexist. One actually delivers the other and vice versa.
Thanks very much for that response, Hugh. And notice we've got a couple more hands, including Cara, who put an interesting point around that in the chat. And we'll come to you in a moment, Cara. But first of all, let's go over to Tanya.
Morning, everyone. James's comments about building empathy by immersing yourself in nature are really critical and important about building that relationship. I'm a nature-based facilitator and coach, and wherever I can, I drag my clients outside, and we do that because of the power of nature to really cut through some of the, excuse my French, the bullshit of what's happening, and to provide some sort of clarity of what's going on. The step I'm trying to work when I'm working with people is and with things is actually move into the more regenerative about what can we learn from nature in the way that nature works, in more regenerative cycles, and taking care of ourselves and And that can stem from as an individual, or whether we actually move that to the organisational space, so that we aren't working, that nature doesn't work flat out. It gives itself time to step back and things. My question is, and I think in doing that, what we do is we build those relationships. That regenerative way of leading, that regenerative way of working, really helps us build that. My question is really, are we, as a society, as the organisations, the public sector, and being along an ex-public sector worker, are we ready for this? And are people, are organisations open to looking at working in a way that is more aligned with the way that nature is working, even though that might be the healthier way of working?
Rhianne, is that one for you to have a go at?
Oh, I've certainly got some strong thoughts on what you've just said, so I'll have a go at answering it. Yeah, I mean, the work you're doing sounds absolutely fascinating, if I'm honest, and I'm slightly sad I don't actually live in the Southwest region, so I could take more advantage of what's going on here. But I think what you're describing there is actually a bit of the challenge, I think, that kind of people have to present back to kind of governments and people who are in control of what's going on out there, or setting the rules or setting the policies and kind of expectations. That the really simple example there of for example, cutting the verges. Something like that comes about because someone sat in a meeting and has written a policy about when something should happen based on, maybe sound evidence, but these decisions get made, and because it has to be done at quite a large scale, sometimes you get quite like blanket rules. And the further up the kind of government chain you go, the more general a lot of these things get, because they need to be, because they have to address so many different situations. So when you get that very kind of general way of doing things, you lead to these, as I say, kind of policies. Hugh's example about what was happening with agri-environmental schemes, they're not capable of reacting flexibly to kind of a particular need in a particular location or particular group of people. But I think the strength of perhaps more communities working together and people is that really we need to be looking at pushing back on some of that and really forcing changes where we think we're relevant, and we could do that with kind of the project working and very specific things. But I do think it goes bigger than that, as you say, this change in mentality around some of this is really important. And I think it's really in the public's role is to try and push and require that from our employers, our businesses, our local community, our local councillors, members of parliament, etc. I think there's a certain role that we have to embrace, that we're wanting to see that change, and then demand and expect it from the people who have the power to change these things. So it's a very tricky one to fix, but I think it's something we need to try and do collectively, because we're starting to hit some real crisis points with some of these things, where some of our habitats are potentially not going to get better because they're hitting points beyond where they're we can get them back in a good state, etc. It's a really pressing time at the moment to try and force some of that change of thinking on people, I think.
That's really great to hear those comments and those kind of encouragements to action from you there, Rhianne. James, you wanted to comment as well.
I mean, I see this from a number of levels. Sorry, I didn't hopefully too much about my background, but there's something about how organizations operate and how communities operate and how we operate as people within them. So I think there's always a responsibility on ourselves to go and make one small change. And if it's very much the what can I do differently, or what can I do to help myself, to help other people, to help our environment. I think the other thing is that are organizations ready for the changes? I think that was the question I really heard. Is, well, it depends. I think I hear some really good examples of organizations that go, actually, I need to understand that, or I need to change our approach, so we really do encourage people to, if they are not feeling particularly particularly energetic at one moment, stop, go outside, go for a walk, rather than sit through a meeting or sit through just get up and go and do, that's the type of thing that an organization should and could be doing very, very quickly. Encouraging much more breaks, encouraging much more connectivity and much more loose time between people. Those are classic things that actually say, well, rather than just going to get a coffee in the corner of your office, go out for a walk together. Those are really simple things people can do without it actually having any impact on an organization, other than a positive one. I guess the other thing I'd say, there is very, very limited evidence that sitting still for long periods of time is very good for us. There's an awful lot of evidence that says it's very bad for us. So there is still a long way to go, because most organizations, certainly when you're sat in front of a screen, require you to sit still for long periods. And having been in a number of board meetings in the NHS where they last for 3, 4, 5 hours, the effectiveness of them, I'd suggest, is often very limited. So, it depends. But what I would, picking up on what Rhianne said as well, is that, there is a generational shift, I think, happening as well. There's a number of people who are saying, particularly post-COVID, saying, I'm not going to work for somewhere unless I am being respected, and unless you respect the environment, unless you treat the workplace as somewhere where there is much more freedom to recognize my wellness at any given moment and to do something about it. And that includes getting up and going for a walk. Now, those are all really might seem really minor things, but again, it comes back to the more time you spend in nature, the more you will appreciate it.
Thanks for that, James. Rachel, you wanted to add something as well.
Yeah, I wanted to come back to what other people were saying before James, but just to follow on from what James just said, I see some really good projects. So in my role on panels and things like that and funding decisions, I see some really good projects going on in workplaces. So Morrison Hospital is a good example. They've had a lot of local places for nature funding to create little hubs where, like in the hospital, they've got these little quads and there's just paving slabs in there where people used to go and smoke them, so I assume. But now we're slowly seeing these quads turned over to nature. They're having mini wildlife gardens. They've got a little roundhouse outside and a little nature garden. So we're definitely seeing a move to that, which is fantastic. I wanted to come back to, I can't remember who brought it up, but I think it was Penny right at the beginning, about challenging paradigms, really, in particular about wildflowers and grass cutting, because that's something I spend a lot of time challenging, because a lot of community councils are responsible for a lot of mowing. And that's generally just, very standard, traditional. They get a contractor in to do the football field, and they cut everything, regardless of how big the football field is, and the whole thing gets cut every 2-3 weeks. So one of the ways that we are able to sort of change that kind of perception is through things like having different modes of cutting. So I never suggest that they just leave everything to a cut and collect once or twice a year. So we look at having different levels, so different areas get mowed at different intervals, and that can often help with the community perception. We look at putting a big impact has been putting paths through. So where a large section of path, and when I say large, we're not talking huge, we might be talking 100 square meters, but just by putting a path through, mowing a path through every couple of weeks, that hugely changed the perception actually in a few areas. I'm hearing this quite a lot now. The community immediately were like, oh, we've got a nature area. It isn't that you're just not mowing it very often because you kind of cut money. Actually, you're creating a nature area and putting up signs. So we have the It's For Them signage across Wales, putting up signs, getting it on social media. Look what we're doing in your park. We're increasing pollinators because pollinators are so important, blah, blah, blah. That has really helped. So a combination of having these multiple different cuts, cutting around the edges, cutting shapes. It sounds really, basic, but cutting teardrop shapes instead of leaving the one area. So, paths, shapes, cutting the edges of paths and the edges of road verges. So that someone's coming out and managing it. It's not that they haven't bothered. You get less complaints, you get less calls in asking why it hasn't been cut. And I think that was all I wanted to say. Yes.
No, really good points, actually, Rachel. I totally agree with that. When you see paths through meadows within parks and things like that, yeah, there's no question. You see that there's a purpose to it, that it has not just been left, that it's being managed, that there's a reason for it. And yes, signage as well to contribute to people's understanding. And as people mentioned earlier, involvement. You as well, actually, Rachel.
Yeah.
So that there's that shared ownership. And Harald, if you'd like to say something.
Yeah, a lot of the conversation today around increasing and enhancing biodiversity has mainly been focused on like terrestrial and on-land systems. And I'm currently working on a project or trying to initiate a project called Think More, which is to do with the preservation and potential restoration and enhancement of marine habitats such as seaweed and kelp. So I've partnered with Pebble up in South Wales, and we're trying to put together a funding application to get funding to carry out like a research and mapping exercise around the coast of Wales so that we can identify the scale and health of the seaweed and kelp habitat there and potentially identify areas that are struggling or need additional support or perhaps enhancement in future. Like I say, we are looking for funding at the moment. So we've applied for the Coastal Capacity Fund and Nature Networks funding. But I just wondered, and I thought perhaps some of the guys from NRW that are on this call would be really interesting to link up with to get your views as to, what you feel, whether one, would this be beneficial? Because we feel like the kind of research that we're doing hasn't been done before at this scale. And we feel if we can't preserve anything unless we identify what we've already got and the health of what, the habitats we've already got. So it's a lot of work in progress. We've got a lot to do, and we're just at the very start of this. And although we have had some links up with NRW, mainly from the planning department, because further down the line, if we do identify areas that need restoration, we've been looking at quite innovative ways that we could look to do that as using a nature-based solution. So we have had some links with the Natural Resources Wales, but not with the conservation team as such. And I think perhaps Rhianne, you'd be really quite instrumental or a really important person to link up with on this. So I guess my question is, what is Natural Resources Wales or, the UK government's view on actually enhancing marine biodiversity outside of the kind of seabed, the seagrass beds and salt marsh, because they've got a lot of attention due to their carbon sequestration abilities. But when you think about all the ecosystem benefits that the type that seaweed and kelp habitats provide, it's almost more diverse in what they can offer than just the kind of seagrass bed. So yeah, over to you.
Thanks for raising that other dimension there, Angharad. That is really, really important. Just very quickly, Rhianne, did you want to respond?
Yeah, certainly, Angharad, do get in touch and kind of leave the details, because I completely agree, and I'm no expert myself, but the marine environment is so incredibly overlooked. And I know there's kind of our marine team is not quite so locally based. There's a national marine team. So they kind of have very detailed knowledge and plans about, all the restoration work and great data banks, but, it can always be filled in and have more detail. So I imagine they'd be, very keen to hear about what's going on. And I do just want to touch on there a little bit of something they mentioned of one of the challenges, I think, in all of this is also kind of talking about that funding step there of, public funds are getting more pressure on them and kind of, a lot of expectations. And with this nature crisis being a little bit misunderstood, there are opportunities to look a bit more broader at kind of some of the wider landscape and kind of looking more down the innovative route, especially for things which are more research and data led around things like green finance. I mean, blue finance is something I know that NRW is very interested in. And kind of this is where perhaps some more of the innovation around some of this comes in. Because, the excellent work that is going on in communities, it can be difficult to get, alas, everything comes down to funding a little bit sometimes, doesn't it? And this is a space where we really need to be more innovative about some of this. And I think, yeah, actually, strangely, the marine world is almost further down that route than the terrestrial world. So it's a really good example of where that approach is coming into fruition, I think. And yeah, just leave the details and we'll try and match you up with some people.
That'd be great. Thank you.
Hugh, you were keen
I just to add that with
that.
Rhianne, I think we really need to push the nature solutions as being the answer to the climate change. So much of this sort of green finance, the blue finance, is directed in one direction at the moment. And we need to broaden that and show the actual, not just the biodiversity and the nature emergency being tackled, But everything that James has been talking about the social side of it, that green finance could do so much more if it was directed away from a sort of a quick solution that gives you nice sound bites of, how many trees they've planted. And the other challenge perhaps is to go away from government cycles of 5 years, because nature won't react in a 5-year government cycle. We need that long-term view and a long-term aim, regardless of who's in Cardiff or who's in Westminster, that long-term view of where we want to get to, and how we're going to get there. And some of these quick hits that look good, and companies can say that they're covering their carbon footprint because they've done this, that, and the other. I think that money being redirected in some of these more innovative projects could do more for society as well as biodiversity, and actually tackle the climate change at the same time.
Absolutely. Yeah, thanks, you. So yeah, do anybody who wants to know more about the Think More project that has just been highlighted, do take a look at the website, and also get in touch with Angharad if you think that there's some way in which you might be able to contribute and assist with that. So finally, we'll come to Cara for your comments before we then ask the panelists just to round things up for us. So Cara, what would you like to say?
Thanks. Yes, just a question to the panel, really. If you think of it, are there any good examples of businesses locally or even nationally, Rhianne is not local, but that the panel could share? Just one example of a business sort of tackling, nature decline in an innovative way, or are there opportunities on the horizon for businesses which are not available yet, something that we can look forward to, like government incentives or policy change that are going to unlock opportunities for businesses to do more on this topic?
Right, that's a really good one to finish with. Thank you, Cara. So, any good examples out there? Well, obviously, we'd heard from Hugh about that particular scheme over in Crosshands. But any other good examples of local businesses getting involved with this particular issue across the South West Wales region, or indeed any new policies or provisions that might be put in place to assist? So, along the panel, anybody want to pick this up? I notice in the chat that Penny is referring to Pier Street in Swansea, where the Environment Centre is, and the amazing green infrastructure that's been put in place along that street. So that's a really good example for those who live or are visiting Swansea. Do go and have a little walk down there and see what's happened there. Rhianne, go on, you're going to step in.
Well, I didn't want to stop the excellent flood of local examples coming through with something that's not too relevant to your region. But I suggest it's kind of a two-pronged answer, I suppose. Yes, there's a lot, as I said, of focusing government on this. The most relevant probably, and sorry, it's terrestrial, but the recent 30 by 30 targets that have been introduced at an international level, and now countries are trying to embed. So it's the fact that 30% of your area should be designated in some way. It's some sort of nature protection by 2030. And certainly that was a key focus of the recent biodiversity deep dive in Wales. So, there is a lot of attention or increasing attention coming through, and some of the, action plans and things that are quite standing in government, they are, trying to take more of an kind of a focus on nature. And I think one of the positive changes actually is you've seen I think Hugh touched on this a little bit, you are seeing a move in thinking in terms of nature, where they're trying to embrace more of an outcomes-based approach to some of the interventions or actions that are being suggested. And then that does also allow, again, it's slightly driven by the lack of public funding, but there's a focus then also coming on multiple benefits. So if you can do one action, but actually that one action delivers, for water quality, air quality, kind of nature, and kind of provides a nice landscape to walk in, those interventions that there's a single purpose, but then will do more. And I think kind of more on the business side of it, I'm not that familiar with that many businesses in the kind of Southwest, but I think it's a little bit of an onus, and I think bigger businesses are being pushed in this direction already with things like corporate social responsibility and ESG, that there's kind of a push to kind of focus a bit more on these sorts of things, but I don't think it's the purview of big business only, because I think, you know, every kind of SME out there and community group can be trying to do a little bit of this, because you only have to work at the scale that's appropriate for you. And then I think as well, we can link it back into what we were just discussing there. And Harrod, this is a really good example for you, so feel free to go and explore and plagiarize. But up in Scotland, the marine environment up there, they've kind of come together as a community, and they've approached Nature Scot to basically they've set up a fund, a marine fund, and they're using the data from Nature Scot, and they've got businesses in the local area, and these are quite large businesses down to the smaller SMEs that are more near the coast, who are paying into a central pot up there, and they're using the data and evidence and the prioritized work plan that's developed by Nature Scot to then direct a lot of action that's going into developing and repairing the marine environment up in Scotland. So that's kind of like quite a good example of where kind of perhaps the data and evidence that's, you know, sits in these public bodies and some of the structures that are quite beneficial can link up and work in with kind of private pots of money, being at, you know, a very large scale or a bit more locally, to try and direct some of this money into actions that are going to hopefully deliver these kind of outcome focused, you know, multiple benefit type interventions. So, and I think some of those ideas are starting to come and foster in Wales. I think I find it quite funny. I find Wales sometimes has really good ideas. So, for example, the Environment Act, which we did in 2016, was fantastic. But then it's taken us a while to really run with it. And sometimes you get kind of England then coming along or Scotland coming along slightly later than us, but they seem to kind of move at a bit more pace sometimes. So I think it takes us a while to embed some of the changes in Wales, because we like to consider things a bit more. And then, so there are some examples out there that we can follow in Wales. It's just a case of really kickstarting some of that, I think.
Thanks for that, Rhianne. And we're going to draw this morning's session to a close. But before we do, what I'd like to do is go to each of the panelists now for some final thoughts. Ideally, if you can present those thoughts in just a couple of sentences, would be really great. But if you need longer, okay. But if you can, maybe just focus on what you would really love to see and what really needs to happen now within this particular context. So let's go in reverse order to the start. So we'll start with James. What would you love to see, and what do you think needs to happen now?
So I'm going to try and be quick, because I think my dog's going to start barking in a second. So what I'd love to see is far more us all just spending a little bit more time and attention thinking about nature and thinking about how we understand nature, and for us all to be in nature just a bit more. And as a start point for all of us, whether in a business, whether in a large organization, in our community, and maybe just a start point is find someone to go for a walk with. Really simple, small steps. And I think that sets us off, and I'll leave the policy context for others.
Rachel.
Okay, yeah. So I mean, I think I love what James just said, but I think just seeing nature in a different way, not accepting the accepted idea of what biodiversity is, because I think, as I said before, a lot of people look outside their window and think, Wales is so green and amazing, but actually seeing the biodiversity loss that we are experiencing, having more joined up thinking across county councils, NGOs, public bodies, Welsh Government. And I think for me, in particular, I want to see more wildflowers. I want to see less mowing. I want to see people looking at grasslands differently. I want them to see wildflower meadows and hay meadows and see them as the carbon sinks and the hive of biodiversity and flora and fauna that they are, and value them more rather than just seeing what they might think is a messy sort of area, and see more of that, spread across Wales in their gardens as well. Everywhere.
You.
Yeah, I think I can agree with both. And I think the challenge for us now is to look at green finance with limited resources, obviously, and limited money going forward. How can we direct businesses to actually tackling nature-based solutions that's going to tackle climate change? And that might be the challenge for us, to come up with solutions for them. So if we can come up with innovative solutions, then there's more opportunities possibly then for them to invest in real solutions that's going to connect people and nature and improve biodiversity across the board, hopefully.
Rhianne?
Just building on what others have said, I suppose I'd like to see nature really at the heart of thinking. It's not just a silo issue for one area of government or some particular range of policies. It's really something, as James will be aware, the NHS, for example, has a lot they could spend on something like this if they thought about nature in a different way, as do kind of other departments and areas. So it's really about embedding that in across everyone's thinking, really, because climate change has become quite cross-cutting. I don't think nature is quite as cross-cutting, I think, as it needs to be. And then just on a personal perspective, what I'd love to see is actually more of a focus on soils. Kind of it's ground, it's the ground that we literally everything comes from, and it's got such potential, and it's slightly overlooked. We don't have a soils policy, a soils approach. Some of the evidence is really missing there. So for me, it's a bit of a personal peeve, but kind of, regenerative land management and soil health and soil use would be a real area of concentration that I'd love to see picked up somewhere.
Some really good takeaways. So thank you for that from the panelists. One of the things that I thought was really interesting in today's session is that when we're talking about the solutions to some of these huge issues that we need to address, it is involving everyone, all sectors. Today, approaches from government bodies at national level, local level, at a community council level, business and industry, colleges, health boards, and community groups and individuals have all been mentioned in the discussion in terms of everybody really needing to take action and, where possible, to work together on action, to collaborate on taking action, which is great, I think. As I said at the start, this session is one of a series of roundtable discussions that are being held in the lead up to the Green Economy Conference. It's a regional conference, and I hope to see many of you on the 22nd of November at the Green Economy Conference at the Swansea Arena. Thank you very much, everyone, and have a good afternoon.